Ielts reading out loud, day 14. I feel like I'm getting worse over time, like somehow, but well, can't stop just because of that. Cutty Shark, the fastest sailing ship of all time. The 19th century was a period of great technological development in Britain, and for shipping the major changes were from wind to steam power. And for shipping, the major changes were from wind to steam power and from wood to iron and steel. The fastest commercial sailing vessels of all time were clippers, three-masted ships built to transport goods around the world, although some also took passengers. From the 1840s until 1869, when the Suez Canal opened and steam propulsion was replacing sails, clippers dominated world trade. Although many were built, only one has survived more or less intact, the Cutty Shark, now on display in Greenwich, southeast London. Cutty Shark's unusual name comes from the poem Tam O'Shanter by the Scottish poet Robert Burns. Tam, a farmer, is chased by a witch called Nanny, who is wearing a cutty shark, an old Scottish name for a short nightdress. The witch is depicted in Cutty Shark's figurehead, the carving of a woman typically at the front of old sailing ships. In legends and in Burns' poem, witches cannot cross water, so this was a rather strange choice of a name for a ship. Cutty Shark was built in Dumbarton, Scotland in 1869 for a shipping company owned by John Willis. To carry out construction, Willis chose a new shipbuilding firm, Scott and Linton, and ensured that the contrast with them put him in a very strong position. In the end, the firm was forced out of business and the ship was finished by a competitor. Willis Company was active in the tea trade between China and Britain, where speed could bring ship owners both profits and prestige. So Cutty Shark was designed to make the journey more quickly than any other ship. In her maiden voyage in 1870, she set sail from London carrying large amounts of goods to China. She returned laden with tea, making the journey back to London in 4 months. However, Cutty Shark never lived up to the high expectations of her owner, as a result of bad winds and various misfortunes. On one occasion in 1872, the ship and a rival clipper, Thermopylae, left port in China on the same day. Crossing the Indian Ocean, Cutty Shark gained a lead of over 400 miles, but then her rudder was severely damaged in stormy seas, making her impossible to steer. The ship's crew had a daunting task of repairing the rudder at sea, and only succeeded at the second attempt. Cutty Shark reached London a week after Thermopylae. Steamships pose a growing threat to clippers as their speed and cargo capacity increased. In addition, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, the same year that Cutty Shark was launched, had a serious impact. While steamships could make use of the quick direct routes between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, the canal was of no use to sailing ships, which needed the much stronger winds of the ocean and so had to sail a far greater distance. Steamships reduced the journey time between Britain and China by approximately 2 months. By 1878, the traders weren't interested in Cutty Shark, and instead she took on the much less prestigious it's not. It's prestigious. Yeah. By 1878, tea traders weren't interested in cutty shark, and instead she took on the much less prestigious work of carrying and cargo between any two ports in the world. In 1880, violence aboard the ship led ultimately to the replacement of the captain with an incompetent drunkard who stole the crew's wages. He was suspended from service and a new captain appointed. This marked a turnaround and the beginning of the most successful period in Cutty Shark's working life, transporting wool from Australia to Britain. One such journey took just under 12 weeks, beating every other ship sailing at that year by around a month. The ship's next captain, Richard Woodgate, was an excellent navigator who got the best out of both his ship and his crew. As a sailing ship, Cutty Shark depended on the strong trade winds of the southern hemisphere, and Wood took her further south than any previous captain, bringing her dangerously close to icebergs off the southern tip of South America. His gamble paid off, though, and the ship was the fastest vessel in the wool trade for 10 years. As competition from steamships increased in the 1890s and Cutty Shark approached the end of her life's expectancy, she became less profitable. She was sold to a Portuguese firm, which renamed her Ferreira for the next 25 years. She again carried miscellaneous cargoes around the world. Badly damaged in a gale in 1932, she was put into Falmouth Harbour in southwest England for repairs. Wilfred Downman, a retired sea captain who owned a training vessel, recognized her and tried to buy her, but without success. She returned to Portugal and was sold to another Portuguese company. Downman was determined, however, and offered a high price. This was accepted, and the ship returned to Falmouth the following year and had her original name restored. Downman used Cutty Shark as a training ship, and she continued this role after his death. When she was no longer required in 1954, she was transferred to dry dock at Greenwich to go on public display. The ship suffered from fire in 2007 and again, less seriously, in 2014, but now Cutty Shark attracts 250,000 visitors a year. Part 2. Saving the soil. More than a third of the Earth's top layer is at risk. Is there hope for our planet's most precious resource? More than a third of the world's soil is endangered, according to a recent UN report. If we don't slow the decline, all farmable soil could be gone in 60 years. Since soil grows 95% of our food and sustains human life in other more surprising ways, this is a huge problem. Peter Gruffin from the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies in New York points out that soil scientists have been warning about the degradation of the world's soil for decades. At the same time, our understanding of its importance to humans has grown. A single gram of healthy soil might contain 100 million bacteria, as well as other microorganisms such as viruses and fungi living amid decomposing plants and various minerals. That means soils do not just grow our food, but are the source of nearly all our existing antibiotics, and could be our best hope in the fight against antibiotic resistant bacteria. Soil is also an ally against climate change, as microorganisms within soil digest dead animals and plants. They lock in their carbon content, holding 3 times the amount of carbon as does the entire atmosphere. Soils also store water, preventing flood damage in the UK, damage to buildings, roads, and bridges from floods caused by soil degradation cost £233 million every year. If the soil loses its ability to perform these functions, the human race could be in big trouble. The danger is not that the soil will disappear completely, but that the microorganisms it its special priorities will be lost. And once this has happened, it may take the soil thousands of years to recover. Agriculture is by far the biggest problem. In the wild, when plants grow, they remove nutrients from the soil. But then, when the plants die and decay, these nutrients are returned directly to the soil. Humans tend not to return unused parts of harvested crops directly to the soil to enrich it, meaning that soil gradually becomes less fertile. In the past, we developed strategies to get around the problem, such as regularly varying the types of crops grown or leaving fields uncultivated for a season. But these practices became inconvenient as populations grew and agriculture had to be run on more commercial lines. A solution came in the early 20th century with the Haber-Bosch process for manufacturing ammonium nitrate. Farmers have been putting these synthetic fertilizers on their fields ever since. But over the past few decades, it has become clear this wasn't such a bright idea. Chemical fertilizers can release polluting nitrous oxide into the atmosphere and excess is often washed away with the rain, releasing nitrogen into rivers. More recently, we have found that indiscriminate use of fertilizers hurts the soil himself, turning it acidic and salty, and degrading the soil they are supposed to nourish. One of the people looking for a solution to this problem is Piers Flores, who started out running a tree care business in the Netherlands and now advises some of the world's top soil scientists. He came to realize that the best way to ensure his trees flourish was to take care of the soil, and has developed a cocktail of beneficial bacteria, fungi, and humids to do this. His researchers at the University of Valladolid in Spain recently used this cocktail on soils destroyed by years of fertilizers overuse. When they applied Flores mix to the desert-like test plots, a good crop of plants emerged that were not just healthy at the surface, but had roots strong enough to pierce dirt as hard as rock. The few plants that grew in the control plots, fed with traditional fertilizers, were small and weak. However, measures like this are not enough to solve the global soil degradation problem. To access our option on a global scale, we first need an accurate picture of what types of soil are out there and the problems they face. That's not easy. For one thing, there's no agreed international system for classifying soil. In an attempt to unify the different approaches, the UN has created the Global Soil Map Project. Researchers from 9 countries are working together to create a map linked to a database that can be fed measurements from field surveys, drone surveys, satellite imagery, and lab analysis, and so on, to provide real-time data on the state of the soil. Within the next 4 years, they aim to have mapped soils worldwide to a depth of 100 meters, with the results freely accessible to all. But this is only a first step. We need ways of presenting the problem that bring it home to government and the wider public, says Pamela says Pamela Chasek at the International Institute of Sustainable Development in Winnipeg, Canada. Most scientists don't speak language that policymakers can understand, and vice versa. Chasek and her colleagues have proposed a goal of zero net land degradation. Like the idea of carbon neutrality, it is an easy understood target that can help shape expectation and encourage action. For soils on the brink, that may be too late. Several researchers are agitating for the immediate creation of protected zones for endangered soils. One difficulty here is defining what these areas could conserve. Area where the greatest soil diversity is present, or areas of unspoiled soil that could act as future benchmark of quality. Whatever we do, if we want our soils to survive, we need to take actions now. Part 3, Book Review. The Happiness Industry, How the Government and Big Business Sold Us Well-Being by William Davies. Happiness is the ultimate goal because it is self-evidently good. If we are asked why happiness matters, we can give no further external reason. It just obviously does matter. This pronouncement by Richard Layard, an economist and advocate of positive psychology, summarized the beliefs of many people today. For Layard and others like him, it is obvious that the purpose of government is to promote a state of collective well-being. The only question is how to achieve it, and here positive psychology, a supposed science that not only identifies what makes people happy, but also allows their happiness to be measured, can show the way. Equipped with this science, they say, governments can secure happiness in society in a way they never could in the past. It is an astonishingly crude and simple-minded way of thinking, and for that very reason, increasingly popular. Those who think in this way are oblivious to the vast philosophical literature. Those who think this way are oblivious to the vast Those who think this way are oblivious to the vast philosophical literature in which the meaning and value of happiness have been explored and questioned, and writes as if nothing of any importance had been thought on the subject until it came to their attention. It was the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, 1832, who was more than anyone else responsible for the development of this way of thinking. For Bentham, it was obvious that the human good consists of pleasure and the absence of pain. The Greek philosopher Aristotle may have identified happiness with self-realization in the 4th century BC, and thinkers throughout the ages may have struggled to reconcile the pursuit of happiness with other human values. But for Bentham, all this were mere metaphysics of fiction. Without knowing anything much of him or the school of moral theory he established, since they are by education and intellectual conviction illiterate in the history of ideas. Our advocates of positive psychology follow his tracks in rejecting as outmoded and irrelevant pretty much the entirety of ethical reflection on human happiness to date. Wow, this sentence is long and confusing. Let me just read it again. Without knowing anything much of him or the school of moral theory he established, since they are by education and positive psychology follow in his tracks in rejecting as outmoded and irrelevant pretty much the entire ethical reflection on human happiness to date. Wait, what? Without knowing anything much of him or the school of moral theory he established, since they are by education and intellectual conviction illiterate in the histories of ideas. Our advocates of positive psychology follow in his tracks in rejecting as outmoded and irrelevant pretty much the entirety of ethical reflection on human happiness to date. Okay, so our advocates of positive psychology is the no in his track in rejecting as outmoded. Okay. But as William Davies notes in his recent book, The Happiness Industry, the view that happiness is the only self-evident good is actually a way of limiting moral inquiry. One of the virtues of this rich, lucid, and arresting book is that it places the current code of happiness in a well-defined historical framework. Luckily, Davies' history with Bentham, noting that he was far more than a philosopher. Davy writes, Bentham's activities were those which we might associate with a public sector management consultant. In the 1790s, he wrote to the Home Office suggesting that the Department of Government be linked together through a set of conversation tubes, and to the Bank of England with a designed for printing device that could produce unforgettable banknotes. He drew up plans for a frigidarium to keep provisions such as meat, fish, fruit, and vegetables fresh. His celebrated design for a prison to be known as Panopticon, in which prisoners would be kept in solitary confinement while being visible at all times to the guards, was very nearly adopted. Surprisingly, Davies does not discuss the fact that Bentham meant his panopticon not just as a model prison, but also as an instrument of control that could be applied to schools and factories. Bentham was also a pioneer in the science of happiness. If happiness is to be regarded as a science, it has to be measured, and Bentham suggested two ways in which this might be done. Viewing happiness as a complex of pleasurable sensations, he suggested that it might be quantified by measuring the human pulse rate. Alternatively, money could be used as the standard for quantification. If two different goods have the same price, it can be claimed that they produce the same quantity of pleasure in the consumer. Bentham was more attracted by the latter measure. By associating money so closely to inner experience, Davy writes, Bentham set the stage for entangling of psychological research and capitalism that would shape the business practice of the 20th century.